Hi, folks. Welcome back. So I think by now most of you know me. I'm Rachel with the Progressive Change Campaign Committee. It's so great to see you all tonight. I see folks here that have been on almost every single call, or at least 3 of these Meet the Candidate calls events. We have Richard Master from the Patriotic Millionaires, and Kate and Phil Villers, and Robert Frame, Scott Walker, Morris Pearl, head of the Patriotic Millionaires. Hello, Monina Von Opel, Vinod Kumar Gadley, Dr. Jerry Bricks, Norbert Hornstein, Woody Kaplan, Mary Geisman, Doug Krieger, Norbert Neal, Dan Siegel, Alan Bradley, and so many other friends with us. So, and then there are folks here that are joining us for the very first time, like Alvin Baum. So regardless, we are so happy to have you here with us now and appreciate you taking the time. We are so excited to have superstar progressive Mondaire Jones running in New York's 17th Congressional District here with us. We are equally thrilled that Congressman David Cicilline is joining us as well. And we're grateful to our partners at Equality PAC and Victory Fund for co-hosting this event for us. So thank you so much, Jeff, Caesar, and Sean. Thank you. So before I turn it over to our co-founder, Dr. Stephanie Taylor, I want to quickly just share a few programmatic notes. We want this call to be interactive. So if your cameras aren't on and you feel comfortable, please go ahead and switch them on. When you're ready to ask your question, and feel free to do this at any point during the call, go ahead and just at the very bottom says chat, and you'll find me, it says Rachel, PCC host, and send me your question at any point. So when we start the Q&A session, I'll call your name, ask that you unmute yourself and join us via video if you aren't already, and then you can ask Mondaire your question directly. So also we'll be recording this, so in case you are joining us late or you have to jump off in the middle, you'll be able to watch the full recording at your convenience later. Also, please forgive me in advance. I'm going to try my best to get to all your questions. Mondaire is eager to hear from you and answer them, and we are going to get through as many as possible. So, and one final note, while these events don't cost anything, we do hope if you feel compelled by what you hear from Mondaire tonight, that you'll consider chipping in and making a contribution to his campaign. And we'll make that super easy for you. We'll check that in the chat box a few times throughout the event. So if that's something you'd consider doing, we would greatly appreciate that. So with that, let me go ahead and turn it over to our co-founder, Dr. Stephanie Taylor. Stephanie?
Thanks, Rachel. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining the call. And as Rachel said, welcome again to our regulars especially. It's really fun to see you all here for what's becoming a regular weekly occurrence for all of us. We're so excited to introduce you tonight to Mondaire Jones, who is running in New York's 17th Congressional District. This is an open blue seat. It hasn't been open in 31 years. It's open because of the retirement of Representative Nita Lowey. It's a very crowded primary. There's a bunch of folks running who have deep pockets, including a billionaire. But with Mondaire Jones, we really have an opportunity to elect a transformational progressive to this very deep blue seat. Just to say a couple words about Mondaire, who is a really special candidate. He was born and raised in the district. He was raised by a single mom in Section 8 housing. He went on to attend Stanford and Harvard Law School, and then moved back to the district to become an attorney in Westchester County. And if he's elected, Mondaire will be the first openly gay Black member of Congress, which would be groundbreaking. He's running on a very strong, bold, progressive platform that includes Medicare for All, a Green New Deal. He's endorsed by Senator Elizabeth Warren. And so we're just really excited about this race and about the opportunities that we have right now with this district. But before we hear from Mondaire, we're actually joined by a very special guest tonight to introduce Mondaire, and that is good friend of PTRIP, Congressman David Cicilline. And Congressman Cicilline, he's a progressive who has risen very quickly in the ranks of House leadership and now regularly pushes the House Democratic Caucus to take these popular progressive positions that he knows are politically popular. He's worked with Elizabeth Warren to take on monopolies. He's been a champion on democracy reform and campaign finance reform. And so I'm really excited that he could join us tonight and that we could hear from him about why he thinks that Mondaire and this race are so very important. So with that, let me give a very warm welcome to Congressman David Cicilline.
Thank you, Stephanie, for that nice introduction. I'm thrilled to be here as a special guest for Mondaire Jones, and thank everyone for being on this Zoom virtual fundraiser. I want to just say, first of all, as a human being, Mondaire is an extraordinary person. His life story is just really remarkable, and being raised by a single mom, living in public housing. He rose to be a member of the Obama administration, an incredible nonprofit leader, a lawyer, worked at the Department of Justice, and is an incredible progressive, the only progressive in this race. If we really want to move the needle in Congress and move forward on some really bold progressive ideas, we need more folks like Mondaire in the Congress of the United States. He was born and raised in NY-17, so he knows this district. He has two main opponents, one that's a state senator who has caucused previously with Republicans for most of his career, and also the son of a pharmaceutical billionaire. The last thing we need in Washington and Congress is someone who is going to pay any special attention to big pharmaceutical companies and powerful corporate special interests. And obviously Mondaire's race is just 4 weeks away. He has run a magnificent campaign. He's up on television. He needs your help. These last 4 weeks are going to be really critical. Equality PAC was proud to endorse him. He will be the first openly gay African-American man in the Congress of the United States. He will be history making just on his very first day of office, but he will make an enormous amount of history in the Congress of the United States. I know that. He's a fighter. He shares our progressive values. He's lived a life reflecting those values, and he will add tremendously to the quality and the work of the Congress of the United States. I couldn't be more excited. We need him to win, and I hope you all help him as much as you can. As much as you've helped him, please help him a little more. He needs particularly financial support. It's been particularly hard during this pandemic to raise money. So we really need folks to step up and help this extraordinary young man who's going to be a great member of Congress. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce formally Mondaire Jones.
These have been the best introductions of any in the course of this now year-long campaign. Thank you, Congressman, for being so kind and for taking time out of your busy schedule. Thank you to Stephanie and Adam and Rachel and Claire, and to all of you who are participating in this, hearing from a candidate who, as I look at the names, the vast majority of you have never heard from. I am so honored to be running to represent the community that raised me, to be the only progressive candidate in this race who is consistently fighting for and talking about the big, bold structural changes that are actually going to improve the lives of everyday Americans, not just a subset of the American population. And that is a critical distinction between myself and the other folks in this race who, if you just listen to what they talk about, say that we got to get rid of Donald Trump, and that's the end of the analysis for them. What I have said consistently is that even before Donald Trump got elected, the vast majority of folks in this economy were struggling. And I guess I know that to be true firsthand, right? I'm running for Congress not because when I was growing up, someone told me I'd be a member of Congress. In fact, I never imagined growing up poor, Black, and gay in the village of Spring Valley that somebody like me could be in Congress. And in fact, I suppose there's never been an openly gay Black member of Congress. I'm running because for me, policy is personal. I grew up in Section 8 housing and on food stamps. And my young single mom still had to work multiple jobs just to be able to put food on the table for us. So when we talk about things like a $15 minimum wage being absolutely necessary at the federal level, that is something I know to be true from personal experience. And my mom got help raising me from my grandparents. My grandfather was a janitor in a local school district, and my grandmother cleaned homes. And when daycare was too expensive, she took me to work with her. So now I'm running to represent the same people whose homes I watched my grandmother clean growing up. And you can imagine that when certain former presidential candidates like Elizabeth Warren, who, as you heard, endorsed my campaign on January 28th, when folks like that talk about providing universal child care in this country, that is a need I know to exist based on my own personal experience. And I don't want any kid to have to go through what I went through growing up. No kid should have to accompany their guardian to work because child care is too expensive. When my grandfather died of cancer, I watched helplessly as my grandmother, as so many seniors do, had to work well past the age of retirement just to pay for the high cost of prescription drugs and medical procedures that are not fully covered by Medicare in this country as we currently know it. I happen to think that healthcare should be a human right in the richest nation in the history of the world. I am proud to be the only candidate in this race running on that concept in terms of an actual policy solution, which is Medicare for all. And frankly, I'm grateful that in my district, in my safely blue district, Democrats, even before COVID, supported Medicare for all at a rate of 69%. And I imagine now that if we did polling, it would be closer to 80 or maybe even 90%, through the help of an entire community. And what was at the time a quality public education that does not exist anymore in that same school district, unfortunately. I was able to transcend those humble beginnings to attend Stanford University, work in the Obama administration on criminal justice reform, for example, at the Department of Justice for an attorney general who actually cared about social justice, and vetting candidates for federal judgeships, which I can assure you is not happening today, where nominees are unwilling to say even that they agree with Brown v. Board of Education. I went to Harvard Law School and got involved in Dorchester and in Roxbury, providing free legal representation to people who couldn't afford it, people who look like me, frankly, and who I already knew as a Black guy growing up in this country are over-policed, over-prosecuted, over-sentenced for things that other people never get into trouble for. And then after that, I founded a nonprofit with some friends called Rising Leaders. We teach professional skills to underserved middle school students in 3 American cities. And more recently, I've been litigating and winning Westchester County's biggest cases as a lawyer in government and serving as a legal advisor to the Westchester County Executive Board of Legislators and the Human Rights Commission. And I'm really proud to be part of a movement of people who are not waiting their turn, but instead are giving voters a choice. And in my case, it's a choice for the first time in 30 years. We have out-fundraised literally everyone in the field with the exception of my self-funding opponent and someone who has raised a little bit more than I have. She has taken over $100,000 last quarter alone from the defense industry, including Ronald Reagan's chief of staff and John Negroponte, George W. Bush's director of national intelligence, one of the architects of the war in Iraq. She has broken her pledge not to take money from fossil fuel industry lobbyists. And of course, one of the other opponents is a state senator from New York. He is actually my representative. And while we have out-fundraised him, he has tremendous name ID that we are working to overcome. My polling shows that this is a race between him and myself, though the self-funding person is in the mix very much in terms of the polling. We started our mail program last week, and we went on television starting today. I'm really grateful that we're able to be on TV in the final 4 weeks of the race and to be educating voters that there is another choice in this race. And like I said, our polling shows that we're well positioned to win anyway. We just have to make sure that we keep up with how we are currently doing in terms of fundraising. The universe of mail recipients has exploded overnight because so many people now are going to be voting by absentee, and we have to account for that. If not, we're going to have to trim the number of mail pieces that we're able to send out because of that universe explosion. It's why I'm so grateful for any support you're able to give in this race. And I also want to definitely make sure that I'm able to answer the questions that you have, so I'll stop talking.
Thank you, Mondaire, and thank you, Congressman Cicilline, so much. So with that, we already have great questions rolling in. Norbert Hornstein, we're coming to you first. What's your question for Mondaire?
Well, I'm glad to see you were a member of the Obama administration, so I have a question for you about that. How do you see the Obama period in retrospect? How progressive do you think it was? And how will we push Biden to more progressive positions if you win, if you get nominated?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. Even when I was in the first term of that administration, I felt like we weren't fighting hard enough. And I say that as someone who has tremendous respect for the president. I'm really proud of what the administration was able to do. But when I look at something like judicial confirmations, for example, I was at the beginning of that when they were writing articles on the historically slow pace at which we were getting those judges confirmed. And it was only after in the Senate they began to change the rules, after continued Republican obstruction and intransigence, that we were able to pick up the pace. And by then, frankly, it was too late. We could have gotten more people. Look at Donald Trump gets people confirmed who are not even rated qualified by the ABA. They're unwilling to say they agree with Brown v. Board of Education, as I mentioned earlier. Compare those with the quality nominees that were prevented from being confirmed in those early years in the first term. I'm furious just thinking about it. And to me, that is symptomatic, I think, of a larger problem in the Democratic Party, where you got a number of folks who respectfully maybe they still have trauma from losing elections in the 80s or something like that, but they feel like if they fight too hard that the American people are going to recoil and that we're going to start losing elections. I think the opposite is true. I think when we show people that we're fighting hard enough, that we'll get more support and we'll start winning more elections. And people will be able to discern between Democrats and Republicans when we're in charge.
Thank you. Okay, up next, we have Jose Cruz. Jose, I'm going to ask you to mute yourself, sir. And what's your question for Mondaire? Hi.
Can you?
Yeah, we can hear you. Oh, now we can't.
There,
now we can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you. It's great to hear your story. It really resonates with me. I grew up in the Bronx under very similar situations. My question is, you know, I'm a history major going back to my college days. And I remember one of my heroes was Franklin Roosevelt. And I live in DC. I was walking down in the FDR Memorial with my wife this weekend and came upon some of his quotes and some of his accomplishments, which included the Works Progress Administration, the Civilian Conservation Corps. Here we are, 36 million unemployed and counting, people who have lost insurance, lost a paycheck, lost hope, lost purpose. Is it time, and would you be willing to propose a program like the CCC or the WPA to give Americans a place to go back to work, get their dignity back, contribute with purpose, and do something above all for the good of the collective rather than for the good of the individual? Back to you. Thank you for the opportunity to ask the question.
Thank you for that question. The answer, in short, is yes. You know, I see it as one feature of a Green New Deal, which does include a federal jobs program. Let's save the planet in the process. Let's use this as an opportunity to do both of those things. The environment is my #1 priority. We don't have a planet that we can inhabit. The other stuff doesn't matter so much now, does it? I have, even before the Green New Deal was proposed, and of course it's still sort of a resolution now, I had thought, well, how is it fair that we are punishing people for not having employment in this economy, but we don't even have enough jobs for them? And so I was happy when I saw Cory Booker start talking about that a few years ago as well. So I am a huge supporter of a federal jobs program. So many people, as you know, sir, 40 million people have lost their jobs since the month of March. I think Stephanie mentioned at the beginning of this that 24% real unemployment exists now. I mean, this is unprecedented, at least in modern history. And so we have to make sure that we are allowing people to go to work, people who want to work, who shouldn't be punished for not being able to work, given the way our economy is set up. And let's do it in a way that is green, that helps us to decarbonize our economy, and make sure that we can avoid irreparable damage, according to that UN IPCC report that says that we've got 10 years left to avoid going beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial global temperatures. Let's do all of those things. In my own district, we have severe transportation issues on the Rockland County side of the Hudson River. The other half is parts of central and northern Westchester County. In most parts of Rockland, you have to drive into the city or take a bus. It's crazy. You know, at least they have the Metro North on the other side of the Hudson River. And so if we know that the transportation sector is the single biggest contributor to carbon emissions, let's invest in high-speed rail, and that it's going to be a job creator. And that's going to get people to work and be able to provide for themselves and their families, and save the economy, I think.
Perfect. Thank you. Up next, we have Judith O'Neill. Judith, what's your question for Mondaire? Oh, go ahead. You're on mute. Judith?
Okay, thank
Here
you.
you go. We hear you. Hello.
Thanks so much. Mondaire, it's an absolute pleasure to meet you. I did not know about you until I received the email, and I'm thrilled that I did in time to join this meeting. So thanks so much, and good luck to you. You answered my basic question a lot in your introduction, which I appreciate, so I know a lot more about what you're planning to do. And what I'd like to know now from all of the exciting initiatives that you've talked about is, aside from infrastructure projects, which I do believe eventually tend to support themselves, how would you economically switch around the funding of things to support the initiatives, the exciting initiatives that you've mentioned?
We have to start asking people who are able to, the super rich in our society, to pay their fair share. That is something that there seems to be an increasing consensus on in the Democratic Party. There used to be a time when Democrats didn't even want to talk about raising taxes on anybody. But you can't do immediate cash assistance like what is absolutely necessary right now, and for me, a priority in the short term. A one-time $1,200 check being the slap in the face that it is for people in my district and all throughout this country, and adequately fund our public schools, and make sure that we are doing things like ensuring a place where everyone can live, right? So for me, that looks like a lot of investment in building affordable units, not just retrofitting as Congresswoman AOC has proposed, but also as Cedric Richmond has proposed, creating or rehabilitating 3 million new affordable housing units. He's proposed legislation to do that. My district is ground zero for the housing affordability crisis. It is just extremely expensive to live in Westchester and Rockland counties. And so we have to demand that people who, if Michael Bloomberg can spend $1 billion on a presidential campaign, I think he can afford to pay a little bit more in taxes to make sure that we can fund essential government services. And there's nothing unfair about that. And we sure know that even under Ronald Reagan, the marginal rate at past a certain level was significantly higher than it is right now. But of course, there are different ways to get to that, right? We can eliminate this artificial distinction in the law between capital gains and ordinary income. We can raise that highest marginal rate for income, for example, above $10 million. Let's start by repealing the 2017 tax cuts that Donald Trump put into place. And so those are some of the ways we can do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, up next, we're going to swing back to the environment. Georgianne D'Angelo. Georgianne, what's your question? Georgianne?
Yes.
Great.
You'll have to read it because I don't remember. I remember the one.
Okay, I've got it. What climate action would be your first priority, Mondaire?
It would be a Green New Deal. You know, a Green New Deal is my #1 legislative priority next to, as I mentioned, immediate cash assistance, right? Because there's so many things I'm talking about in this race, other people not. No one else is talking about criminal justice reform in this race, in my primary. No one else is talking about tuition-free public colleges and universities so that we can liberate an entire generation of people to meaningfully participate in our economy instead of having to take on crippling student debt that has left thousands of people in my district living at home with their parents or their grandparents because they can't afford to be out on their own living independently. But if we don't have a planet that we can inhabit, if we cannot ensure a livable future for not just ourselves, but our children and our children's children, then the other stuff just does not matter so much. So I want to work with other members of Congress, people of good conscience, who are going to turn the Green New Deal into actual legislation and press forward. It has to include infrastructure. It has to include a jobs program. I mean, how can it not in the midst of what we're dealing with right now, where we're seeing record unemployment, for example? And we have to decarbonize our economy. The other thing that other people in this race are not talking about as they do these modest market-based proposals is the fact that we need federal mandates that, for example, end fracking, end offshore drilling, end the exportation of crude oil. That is how we are going to do the kind of decarbonization that will be required to save the planet and avoid irreparable damage with 10 years left on the clock.
Thank you. Okay, up next we have Monina Van Opel and Ed. I'm going to go ahead and ask you that you unmute yourself, Mondaire. We have a question on taxes from Mondaire and Ed. What's your question?
A question is, it seems that having our education funded by real estate taxes embeds economic and racial segregation. And I know actually in Indiana, surprisingly, they did an experiment where they started funding it with sales tax, but a non-regressive sales tax that excluded food and so forth. What is your feeling about changing how we finance our public system so we can get more money into the school system, but not have it embed this segregation?
I think it's the right way to go. The fates of millions of young people, including in the district where I grew up, by the way. It's called the East Ramapo Central School District, and I don't expect anyone on here to have heard about that, but if you Google it, you won't read nice articles about it. It's a subject of the episode of This American Life on NPR. There's just a successful verdict yesterday for the Spring Valley NAACP against the school board, which does not believe in public education, if you can imagine. And you've seen the elimination of 506 teaching and other staff positions since 2009, and only 185 of those positions have been fully restored since that time. It's crazy what's going on here. 97% of those kids are Black and brown. 80% of them are eligible for free or reduced lunch the way I was when I was growing up. We have to do away with a property tax-based system of funding our public schools in this country. If education is to be the great equalizer that all Americans want to believe that it is, that it says that if you just go to and do well and work hard in public schools, that things will just work out for you, then we have to make sure that we are offering a quality education. In New York State, the Constitution requires a sound and basic education. That's the language from the New York State Constitution. And so we have to make sure that we're doing that. And in order to do it, of course, the federal government needs to be stepping in and fully funding our schools, increasing money under Title I for our most impoverished schools, increasing money under Title IV to make sure that we have the technology that we need to social distance learn, for example, to distance learn. So many kids don't have laptops, to say nothing of, or desktops, to say nothing of internet access. But we have to make sure that at the state and local levels where most of the funding is coming from, we are not relying on basically a system that has a really racist impact, I think, on people, Black and brown kids. I want kids in my district to be able to go to schools in Chappaqua, which are fantastic. If you look at the demographics, I think it's like 4% of Chappaqua schools are Black. And there are some really good other great school districts where I live. You've got folks who are opposing affordable housing units in their neighborhood, people who want to think of themselves as liberal and progressive, which makes me so sad to see, frankly. But it would be best, I think, if we had a system where the state is distributing money equally to all school districts, and it's not relying on the value of property.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's keep this going. We have a question from Robert Frame. Robert, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to mute yourself. Robert, what's your question for Mondaire?
First, I want to share something as a history professor. Under Ike Eisenhower, the marginal tax rate was 90%. So just shoot it up there. It's not a big deal. And he was very Republican. It of a different era.
It was indeed. And what, in 1981, when Ronald Reagan took office, for income over 1 million, it was 70%, right? Then he cut it down in 1981 to 52%, I believe.
So
yeah.
There's space for that. Say, the question I wrote was about being an older queer guy who grew up in a less accepting social situation. And the 2018 election showed us that if people campaign for the people, the attitudes are different. The number of transgender folks who were elected in 2018, including a couple to the city council here in Minneapolis where I live, was kind of surprising and great. And for those who didn't grow up queer, I'll tell you, like, you didn't expect to have marriage equality not just be an option during your lifetime, but even become normalized already. So but of course I can't shake that past. And so does your electorate give you pause? Do you feel fearful that being openly gay is going to harm you with your kind of voters who'd vote for you anyway, or is that not a fear?
It's so, I really appreciate the question. I came out to sort of everyone when I was 24 years old. I grew up in the Baptist church, where, at the time I was growing up, and still today, it's taboo, though less so today than it was even a decade or two ago, right? I just never imagined a future for myself in politics, because it would mean that I would have to live a lie, and maybe someone would find out that I was gay, and that would be the end of my public service career. And then I've just been so inspired by what I've seen over the past 5 years, to say nothing of the past 10 years. I've experienced more racism in this race, frankly, than I've experienced homophobia, to be clear. And I'm sad to tell you that racism has come from within the gay community, but that's a topic for another day, I guess. We are defying expectations at every stage of this campaign. We had polling from February that showed that Democratic voters largely viewed it to be a plus that a candidate was gay. So I thought that was really cool. Of course, these are Democratic voters, but even the Republicans and the independents in my district, none of them have been saying, I mean, many of them like me, despite the fact I'm the most progressive person in the race, over some of the other folks who they consider to be career politicians who are beholden to special interests.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, I think folks, I think we have time for one or maybe two more questions. So again, bear with me if I didn't get to it. I will make sure to stick my email in the chat. And if I don't get to your question, I promise I will get back to you and connect you to the best person from Mondaire's team to answer your question. Okay, up next is Jerry. I'm gonna say your last name probably wrong again. I'm gonna have, Jerry, you've been on a bunch of our calls, so I'm gonna have to learn how to say your last name. Jerry Medes, question on money and politics. I'm gonna go ahead and ask you to mute yourself. Jerry, what's your question for Mondaire?
Well, given the wealth of at least one of your opponents, and what I assume is a self-funding campaign by at least one of your opponents, I'm curious as to how money in politics is resonating in the district, and are voters expressing any concerns about the wealth of your opponents, or do they just not care and they're judging them by other criteria?
There are a few interesting dynamics at play. I will start by saying that the vast majority of the people who are paying attention to this race, who know at least something about the candidates, are most opposed to that state senator who was part of the IDC, where he caucused with Republicans despite running and getting elected as a Democrat. And that has taken away attention from what I consider to be an even bigger scandal, which is that there's literally someone trying to purchase this congressional seat, not doing it the traditional way. Maybe he'll do like a meet and greet every now and again virtually, but has been on television for 14 weeks out, spending well over $100,000 on a weekly basis. Yesterday he dropped, in the final 5 weeks, $200,000 a week on broadcast. It is extraordinary at the congressional level to be spending many millions of dollars on a race. And so that gets kind of, and there are a lot of people who find it to be a distortion of our democratic process, but it doesn't inspire as much ire as the other candidate. And so it just so happens that we have a few terrible options, and so people are directing their outrage, most of their outrage, towards the guy who's not a real Democrat in this race, who has a good chance of winning. Like I said, I mean, he was the only person in my poll who was ahead of me, and back in February, and it is because his Senate district, of the elected officials running in this race, his Senate district is the largest. There's an assembly member who I was ahead of in my poll, even before doing mail and TV. And we're going to be changing that, of course, over the final 4 weeks of the race. I'm really excited about that. We make well over 5,000 phone calls a day. I have a digital organizing director who comes to us from the Elizabeth Warren campaign. She was the deputy for digital in Iowa and led the digital operation in Wisconsin. We do targeted text messages. We do town halls and meet and greets. Joe Stiglitz, Nobel Prize winning economist, is doing a town hall on the economy with me on Friday. So we're just doing topical things like that, and of course doing mail and television. But I'm even more emboldened to fight for campaign finance reform after my experience of campaigning the traditional way, doing the hard work of raising money every day, which shouldn't have to happen, frankly, in our democracy. And then having someone just move back to the district after being gone for decades, not even being registered to vote at the time he announced his campaign, and just throwing many millions of dollars, bombarding people with multiple mailers a week, starting in March, being on television, for, like I said, for 14 weeks out. It's really extraordinary.
Thank you, Mondaire. Okay, I'm going to sneak in one more question. Deborah Porter, Deborah, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to mute yourself. Deborah, what is your question for Mondaire?
Well, I was actually going to ask him how he can make this a bigger issue about the IDC membership of Carlucci, and how he can highlight that Schleifer is just a guy who inherited a lot of money.
You know, I hope that, you know, I have finite resources in my campaign, and you know, I've spoken to my campaign manager about this, who is also, I owe so much to him. He's on this call, Charlie Blatler. We have finite resources, and so my message, and I think it's probably good practice anyway, for my message to be a positive message, one that is going to get my message out to everybody. If other groups want to educate people about Carlucci's membership in the IDC, because I think most people still don't know, he narrowly survived his primary in 2018. He survived with 1,800 votes, and about 24,000 people came out or so. But not enough people know about that. And so I know that there are other groups who are working on it, that are working on educating people, but they probably need support. And the same is true for Mr. Schleifer, who the people, you know, maybe they're annoyed by the amount of mail that they get from him, but don't understand what's going on here. That a prosecutor doesn't just come upon $73 million, and that he is, you know, he is heavily invested in the pharmaceutical industry. His father, you know, $2.3 billion, Lenny Schleifer, and that kind of thing.
Thank you, Mondaire. And thank you everyone for all those, for being so engaged and asking those questions. So I'm gonna go ahead and kick it back to Stephanie for her to share her final thoughts with us here.
Great, thanks, Rachel. Thank you to everyone who's on this call, and thank you to Mondaire for spending time with us and answering these questions. Before we conclude, I want to highlight one thing that Mondaire said something earlier that I just want to bring back. He said, policy is personal. And yes, it is. We need people like Mondaire in Congress who believe this and live this and bring their own important experiences to bear as they legislate. And that's really, to me, one of the reasons why this race is so important and why Mondaire is such an important candidate and would be one of those folks who really could be transformational in Congress. So as always, if you are able, please consider chipping in. Every dollar is important, especially in a primary like this one, especially as we've heard when you're up against pharmaceutical billionaire money and defense industry money. Thank you again to everybody, and thank you again to Mondaire.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to all of you for joining, and thank you for any support you're able to give in the primary.
Thank you. And Mondaire, was there a few other last final thoughts that you wanted to leave with folks before we wrap this up, besides everything that was amazing that you've already said?
You know, I think the reason that the Congressional Progressive Caucus has endorsed me and so many other people, the Equality PAC, which is the Political Action Committee of the LGBT Congressional Caucus, and so many other folks like Elizabeth Warren and Julian Castro, whose endorsement we're announcing tomorrow, have weighed in, is because they understand that this is literally, I think, the best opportunity remaining now that all these primaries are wrapped up. It's an open seat to elect a progressive to Congress. This is a safely blue district, and we can afford to challenge ourselves to do better in this district, even as we challenge Republicans. And that has been my message from the outset of this campaign. And with your help, we are going to continue to defy expectations, as we have been doing at every stage of this race.
Thank you, Mondaire. Mondaire, so I'll share with you, one of the participants just chatted me and said he's incredibly qualified and we need him in Congress. So on that, let's end on that from Jose Cruz. Thank you, Jose. And with that, thank you so much for being here. thank you, Mondaire, thank you, Congressman Cicilline and Stephanie, but especially and most importantly, thank you to all of you on the line with us that have took the time to be here and be so engaged and curious about Mondaire. So stay safe, stay well. If you can contribute, please consider that. The link is in your chat. My email is also in your chat. So if you would like to get more engaged with Mondaire's campaign, if you want to volunteer, if you want to learn, dig into more of the issues, please just email me. And I promise I will link you up to the best person on Mondaire's campaign. We'll get your question answered. So keep your eyes open for the next event in the series. And until then, stay safe, stay well, stay positive, and we'll see you soon. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks.
Night.
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 Thank you.